The Isuzu MU-X is refreshingly old school. Nothing electrified, nothing hybridized to worry about. Just a choice of turbo diesel engines, 7 seats, reasonable value, and for 2025, a bit of a midlife update. Australians buy shed loads of these MU-Xs. In fact, it was second only to the Ford Everest in the large SUV segment last year. There are 4 different greys to choose from, 10 different trims, choice of 1.9 litre diesel or 3 litre diesel and 4x2 and 4x4. And for 2025, we have a new flagship model as well. This very cool looking X-Terrain, which I'm going to focus on today. It's $73,990 to drive away, which feels expensive for an Isuzu, doesn't it? But for that, you're getting a very good looking, very high specification vehicle that tows 3.5 tons, which is exactly what Aussies want as a weekend adventurer. I'm going to give you a look around it. We're going to go through it. We're going to do some off-roading and some on-roading as well for this very exciting new car for 2025.
Chasing cars. Honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
Budget Direct.
Like Isuzu's D-Max X-Terrain that this vehicle is based upon, it really does overdo the black in quite a cool bad boy way. There's this giant gloss black grille which has shades of Ford to me, and also high gloss surround these fog lights as well. And if you look at the headlights, they've been revised for 2025 as well. They're full LED and really do sharpen the front end of this car up. Down the side continues the blackness. These are new 20-inch wheels, and these are highway tyres, pretty skinny ones as well. They're just 50 profile round there. And if I follow you around, there's also gloss black here for the mirrors, if you look at the side skirts and the trim underneath, and of course the wheel arches, they make a big difference against this grey paint. Got quite Audi RS vibes to it, this paint actually, doesn't it? Really does help with the sportiness. It's still distinctively MU-X at the back. You'll notice that the Isuzu badge, that's shrunk a little bit, and to make way for this bar across there. That looks like a full-length light bar, but it doesn't actually illuminate. And these rear lights, they're new as well, these LEDs. So for 74 grand drive away, what do you get? Well, it's good news and bad in this MU-X. It still feels rather old school in places. The door tops, for example, they're still rock hard plastic. The dash itself, that's a little bit softer up there. Positively, these leatherette seats, they feel fantastic, really nicely soft under my bum, and also a nice little red stitching through it as well, showing the sportiness of this X-Terrain. It's also red ambient lighting going through the doors as well. That's pretty cool. What I'm not so much of a fan of is this central piano black, which I thought was the sort of thing that was dying out because it does attract a lot of smudge marks, a lot of scratches as well. So I think that's going to weather quite quickly. That's also through the doors. An improvement is the central infotainment screen. That's 9 inches, and there's a 7-inch driver's display up front as well, along with some analog dials. Now, there's nothing too complex about it. I suppose it's refreshingly old school, nothing complicated, but it's not flashy like the portrait screen that you get in Ford's Everest rival. There's also no head-up display. I'd have liked that in this car at this price. There's also no sunroof in these cars. There's also power seats for the driver and passenger, and 2 setting heated seats up front as well, but no ventilated seats. And to show it's 2025, Isuzu has fitted 2 USB-C ports up front. While you do get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, there's no wireless charging pad, which again you'd think would be included for this sort of money. One thing that Isuzu has stuck with is these clever cup holders that just pop out like this. And I'll tell you why they're super clever is because if you put your cold water bottle in there, it does keep the drink incredibly cold if you're running aircon, or if it's a cold day and you put your hot cup of coffee in there and put the heating on, it'll keep it a bit warmer as well. A simple, effective thing. Pretty good back row seat space for the kids as well. And I must say, these rear seats, they've got a nice sponginess underneath, so pretty comfy for long distance travel. This armrest folds down. It's got nice little cup holders to utilize, and also 2 more USB-C ports. They're easily accessed through here, and up in the ceiling, that's your vents. I do like their placement. They get nicely onto your face and you can control it through there. A really nice little touch. And even the middle row seat here, that's reasonably spacious, and even though the backrest is quite firm, underneath it's pretty good. So you could have 3 kids or even 3 adults traveling back here okay. There's an auto tailgate as you would expect. There's even a clever feature where you can walk up to it with your shopping bags and it'll pop open for you if you've got keys in the pocket, but I'll just use the button for this one. It opens up to reveal a pretty sizable boot. So with 5 seats in place, you've got over 1,100 litres in there. And in a shame to Toyota's new Prado, you can see this is how a 7-seat boot is properly done. Nicely even, nice flat floor. And the rear seats, they pop up pretty easily. And you've even still got 311 litres behind these. And there's a nice recline to those, which I'll show you inside in a moment. There's even some little safety under storage here at the back of the boot, and of course the spare wheel underneath for you. On the versatility front, these centre rows don't slide on runners, unfortunately, but they do have a nice recline if you want to lay back business class style. Now, if you want to access the third row of seats, that's easily done with a little handle here, and these tumble forward. And then it's very simple to climb into the back, and it's actually pretty spacious. For a 7-seater, it would be really good if that centre row could slide forward for a little bit more legroom, but otherwise it's just about tolerable for a 6-foot adult like me, but otherwise fine for a child. So this is the fun bit. We're off-roading in an off-road park somewhere in country Queensland in the new X-Terrain. Now these things have 235mm ground clearance and excellent 800 meters wading depth. There's also a good chunk of underbody protection. I've had to climb under and given it a quick tap, and it's pretty solid metal under there as well. Now these cars have had rough terrain mode, it's called, since 2021, but for this new 2025 model it's able to be used with the rear diff lock at the same time. It's also been revised a bit more to make it better on different types of terrain, and I must say we've been testing it all morning here and it is deeply impressive. Just going down a pretty substantial hill now, but where it really shines is on the uphill sections, especially on loose traction. And with those engaged, it means you've got mechanical traction at the back and electronic traction control at the front. So I've got this incline coming up. It's about 30+ degrees. I'm pointing towards the sky, and with very minimal throttle input, it just absolutely climbs over. It's so smart and it's absolutely effortless. What this thing has the ability to do is, if it detects one of the wheels spinning up, it'll quickly brake that and send power to the other wheel on that axle, giving you the traction you need, especially when you're climbing a serious uphill thing. And the angles we have been getting, I'm sure you'll see it in some of the footage we've been able to capture. These things have been right up in the air, one wheel absolutely to the sky, and we're pointing up again, and it just walks it. It really is incredible. And I struggled to think of many places most 4x4 drivers would go that this thing would be properly challenged at. It really is a smart bit of kit. So this rough terrain mode, that can work in 4H or in low range as well, but the rear diff lock, that will only work with 4L selected. And what I do like is I've been going down some of these pretty steep down hills, and there's no nasty crunching or graunching as traction control smacks around and just makes one hell of a racket, making for pretty ugly sounds and not the most relaxing driving experience. Whereas I'm just gonna go down one of these slopes here. So this is another one that's 30 degrees plus, and I've got hill descent control as well, which I can engage and just go at super slow speed. It just walks it down effortlessly, and yet not a sound to be heard. It's pretty serene and relaxing, not least in these nice leather seats as well. Although I must say, on a hot day like today, I wish they were ventilated as well. I don't think you're going to be disappointed with any sort of off-roading with these X-Terrains out the box, and that's just on all-terrain tyres that we've reduced to 24 psi. Fantastic, great abilities. We're increasingly seeing that off-roaders have an underbody view that's just an amalgamation of images that have happened from cameras around the vehicle. Now this MU-X doesn't have the full system. I can't see completely transparently underneath my vehicle, but it does have an augmented reality view of what's happening beside my front wheels, and that's also showing my steering angle as well. So that's helping me pick through the ruts, avoid the larger rocks as well. So again, more safety had with that camera system. First thing I must tell you about the new MU-X is, because it's just an update and not a generational change, it still has part-time four-wheel drive and not full-time four-wheel drive like something like the new Prado or the Ford Everest. So that means when I leave a dirt road like I've just done, I must turn it into 2H, which is just done there with a bit of a fight. Okay, onto the asphalt and we're away. Now, the suspension has been revised for this new model, and what they've done is they've changed the dampers. They've tried to make it a little bit more compliant on road. It was never a bad ladder frame chassis, these MU-X's. They rode pretty well, just not quite at the absolute top level. I think the Ford Everest, most of us regard that as the absolute benchmark in the segment. So they have improved what they call the high-speed ride. So there's going to be no changes if you're used to these vehicles at low speed, but at higher speed, it just seems to absorb the bumps a bit better with those new dampers and just hold the road a little sweeter as well. I've got a reasonable turn coming up here, and yeah, the body roll's kept in pretty good check. I'm not getting thrown around so much. What I don't like about these ute-based SUVs, even with their coil-sprung rear suspension, they can be very pogo-y, bouncing around and making you feel quite nauseous, especially those that are sat in the back. But the ride quality I'm getting off this is pretty good. It's not as good as a monocoque SUV, of course, but I must say, even with just me on board, it's riding pretty nicely on these country roads. No great surprise that the steering isn't exactly what you'd call the last word in feedback. It's very light, but at the same time, that just makes country life and off-roading quite simple. It's not exactly going to require much effort to drive one of these in all sorts of conditions. It could just use a little bit more weight for when you're around these sort of roads. As for the engine, well, there's no change there. It's the tried and tested 4-cylinder 3-litre turbo diesel that Isuzu's renowned for, because it is a solid unit. It's proved very reliable relatively, and a lot of people swear by it, especially for off-roading and towing. 140 kilowatts, 450 newton meters. Nothing exceptional, but at the same time, more than ample for the sort of use this car's going to be getting. And speaking of which, even though we've seen it shine off-road and with these incredibly smart rough terrain mode, a lot of these are going to be spending the bulk of their time on road, serving as the family car, the occasional weekender, basic off-roader. So it really has to do well on the daily duties, and that means around town and on roads like I'm on now. You'll just be able to hear if I just pull in and then just do a little launch. The response isn't fantastic, as you'd expect. It gets a bit gruff when you put your foot down, but there's nice easy power, and that torque just pulls you along with ample shove. It feels like a lazy motor. Being a 3-litre, it's just that larger displacement, so you feel like you've got plenty in reserve, and it doesn't have to stress itself. It doesn't have to work too hard like some of the smaller twin turbo engines out there in these sort of vehicles. One thing I was concerned about with this X-Terrain is the 20-inch wheels it's on and the tyre package that they've put on it. It's just a 50 profile set of tyres on it, and so they're quite thin, and I was expecting it to be feeling all the road bumps through it, but they seem to have done a very good job of setting up the suspension on this car to cope with that, and I'm not getting any nasty shocks. I'm certainly not getting any feeling of too much firmness or back shattering hits. So yeah, credit where it's due. For such a skinny tyre, that's pretty impressive. And the same tyres, using it on the dirt road, even though you'd prefer some all-terrain tyres, of course, on that sort of situation, they've been absolutely fine. And if you were on all-terrain tyres like the lesser grade MU-X, it's going to be feeling a lot noisier, and you're going to be getting a lot more hits through it on a road surface like this. So it feels like a pretty good thing for everyday use. The tyre package, the suspension, all works pretty well as an everydayer. These MU-X's are 5-star ANCAP cars because they do have a very comprehensive suite of driver safety systems. Now, they used to be pretty ordinary actually in these old Isuzus. The lane keep assist was very grabby, and it didn't work under 60 kilometers an hour. That's all been addressed now, and it actually doesn't pogo you between the white lines or anything like that. But what I do like is how it's become so commonplace for these driver assist systems to be an absolute nightmare to turn off, typically through the center screen. Well, Isuzu's actually got a clever little mode where I just press and hold a steering wheel button, never have to take my eyes off the road for that. That's a 2-second job, and I've just taken off all my lane keep and lane emergency warning, all that stuff, so nothing's beeping at me there. It also has speed sign recognition, so it's just going to pick up the 80 sign up here for me, and if I go above that, it's going to beep. Yeah, of course it will. But there is also a little button that you can turn off. That one is through the screen, and really good is it stays off when you turn the car off and on again. Now that is not a common feature at all on certain cars, so for it to default to the off position where you'd like it, because I'm not suggesting anyone should speed or even go a few kilometers an hour over the speed limit, but it does occasionally make errors and pick up the wrong speed sign. So in this vehicle it doesn't do that because it stays off. Making everyday life easier, there is intelligent radar cruise control. We've used that around town and in traffic, and it stops and goes really seamlessly. Very impressive bit of kit, so top marks there to Isuzu. There's also a 360-degree camera. Absolutely love those for parking, especially with a big vehicle like this. That's got your bird's eye view if you want it, and all these surround sound cameras as well. Without being overly flash, these things are very easy to live with. They're just a nice thing on the road, very simple to drive. It's one of those cars that's actually very easy to live with. There's not much road noise getting in. Sat up nice and lofty high in my leatherette seats, which pretty well padded under the backside, nicely bolstered as well. Of course, I've got multi-adjust, this being the range topper. I've got lots of electric control as well to get a good driving position. Isuzu's also thought about long distance travel. You can tell there's proper padding for the center armrest and my door armrest. There's also pads down at my knees, just on the central console as well, so you can rest your legs up against that, or if they're getting bashed around when you're off-roading, that's all pretty good. I can see that there are scratches already on the high gloss center console, but other than that, the reflections aren't too bad off the steering wheel, which is another thing. You don't realize how irritating that is until you're actually on a long drive and the thing's shining off into your face all day. As for the ownership experience, well, once you've bought one of these things, you get a 6-year factory warranty, but that's only 150,000 kilometers, which is a bit stingy. The years is good, the distance traveled isn't great. It should be unlimited, in my opinion. Servicing is $469 per visit, and that has to happen every 15,000 kilometers. So if you compare that to something like a Prado, where they ask you to do it every 6 months or every 10,000 kilometers, there's a big benefit there. On the servicing cost front, overall, this updated MU-X, it just feels like a comfortable old pair of boots, if you like it. It really is quite old school in the way it goes about its business, in its setup, and of course in its engine and its drivetrain as well. There's no worry about electrification, hybridization, anything like that. It's just old school turbo diesel, just puffing along, pulling you along really quite nicely, and it's a nice, lazy, easy thing to drive. I don't know how much longer you'll be able to buy these sort of diesel cars. I know Isuzu has a lot of work to do there when it comes to actually offering other vehicles in its range with the new emission standards that Australia requires, so it's an interesting thing to watch and see exactly what engines could end up in the MU-X and the D-Max ultimately as well. So it's a watch this space for that. But of course, this X-Terrain being the flagship, it's going to be the one that everyone wants, not least with the drive away pricing that make it look a bit better value than the ones below it. It really does have decent specification. It's riding really quite nicely. Again, the tyres, I was worried about the ride quality, but it just seems absolutely fine for what we're doing here. So I can see these things being a very strong seller in the MU-X range. Plus, they look the best, don't they? It really is a sharp looking thing, so I imagine you'll spot quite a few outside the schools, outside the gymnasiums, outside the kids' sports clubs as well. So that's our first sample of the 2025 Isuzu MU-X, and what is our takeaway? Well, I must say the most interesting thing of the whole update is this X-Terrain model. I think it was much needed for the MU-X range. It really does give a much sportier personality to this family favourite. And there's incremental changes as well. I think the suspension has been slightly improved, helping the drive experience on road. And I must say the off-road test that we have done, I'm deeply impressed with how that rough terrain mode works and with the rear diff lock in action as well. This car, $74,000 to drive away. I mean, it's pretty well specified, but it's a lot of money. But even so, it's still cheaper than the equivalent Toyota Prado and the Ford Everest rival. So it'll be really interesting to see how it performs in this hotly contested segment. I would love to know what you think about this new MU-X, how it compares to that competition. Please leave some comments below, subscribe if you haven't already done so. And as ever, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.